Country music, goat gonads, politics, and pirate radio. What more do you need? Welcome to American Esoterica. If Fisher Glass gives you the banjo, this is the tune that I can't hum because it's copyrighted, but you know the one. The essential stuff in between. The personalities, events, and other ephemera that shape our history and culture. I'm Brian Powers. Before we begin, I want to warn listeners that this episode will discuss some sensitive topics, and I'm going to do it in the most juvenile way possible. So this is in the solid PG to PG-13 range. You've been warned. The story I'm about to tell you is true. This is the bizarre story of the origins of the popularity of country music in America, and it is far, far weirder than you could have possibly imagined. It all began with a man named John Romulus Brinkley. In 1907, Brinkley and his first wife began touring as a song and dance routine to hawk their own homemade tonics. Brinkley had found a niche in criticizing more mainstream medicine as self-interested and corrupt, preying on the fears of his audiences to sell them snake oil solutions. To be fair, the practice of medicine was at a crossroads. It would be 3 more years before the Flexner Report would start to reorganize it as a more serious, disciplined, and scientific institution, so it was a ripe target for hucksters like Brinkley to sow doubt. Brinkley wanted to aim higher, however, and he moved to Chicago to enroll in Bennett Medical College. It wasn't exactly a legitimate medical school, more of an alternative medical school, or even better, an alternative to medicine school. Brinkley didn't last long there, though. He dropped out and spent the next few years jumping from place to place to avoid debt collectors. One of his numerous stops was to work in a slaughterhouse, where he took notice that goats seemed to be more resistant to human disease than the other animals. In another stop, he claimed to be a doctor specializing in men's issues, charging $25 a pop to inject colored water into their butts to cure impotence. That one got him run out of town by a bunch of men, angry at their impotence to catch the man who failed to cure their impotence. Oh, and he married his second wife, which came as a real surprise to his first wife, to whom he was still married. After all the years of running and scamming, Brinkley finally got back to his dubious studies, earning a medical degree from the Eclectic Medical College of Kansas. It was a similar school to the one he had attended earlier in that it was a diploma mill that focused more on homeopathic remedies and snake oil tonics than actual medical education. But at the time, it wasn't much worse than anything else. Brinkley answered an ad to become the town doctor for the rural community of Milford, Kansas in 1917. And for a time, he proved himself to be a capable, compassionate doctor, guiding the small town through the worst of the Spanish flu epidemic. If only our story stopped there. But no. Not long after Brinkley's arrival in town, a local farmer complained of a well-known issue to the new doctor. The farmer was having trouble getting his crop to grow. He wanted to plow more. He had erectile dysfunction, okay? Brinkley liked his position in town and knew he couldn't charge the man $25 for just a colored water injection. The farmer supposedly joked that if only he had some of them buck goat balls, he'd be randy as a billy goat. Eureka! Inspiration struck the doctor like a lightning bolt. Stories differ. The farmer claimed that Brinkley had offered him a large sum of money to be a guinea pig, while the doctor claimed the farmer begged him to do it and paid him $150. But what is true is what Brinkley did next. He gave the farmer exactly what he wanted by surgically implanting goat testicles into the man's scrotum. Let's pause here for a collective ew break. But Brinkley had found his new quack treatment. His very second patient for the surgery was so pleased with the results that he brought his wife in. Brinkley slapped a pair of goat ovaries into her, and a year later, they had a baby boy they named Billy, possibly in honor of the supposed origin of their revitalized sexual capacity. That story took off, And soon Brinkley's operation became the talk of a nation, with folks pouring in from all over to pay the $500 to $750 fee, over $10,000 in today's money. Brinkley even came up with a slogan for his quack treatment: "Make any man the ram what am with every lamb." The operation was seen as cure-all for whatever ailed you: headaches, fatigue, sexual dysfunction. Take 2 goat balls and call me in the morning. The reviews were relentlessly positive, and Brinkley started to consider expanding his franchise. He flew out to California to perform the surgery on the owner of the Los Angeles Times, Harry Chandler. While the California planned expansion didn't pan out, the trip was a watershed moment for Brinkley for 2 reasons. First, the operation on Chandler led to even more notoriety in national press, which meant that a tidal wave of new patients descended on Milford, funding Brinkley's full vision for a hospital. Second, Brinkley was introduced to Chandler's other acquisition, a local radio station, and the full power of such a tool was immediately apparent. Brinkley wanted that power for himself. He founded his own station in 1923, programming KFKB, all the hits, all the classics, with a wide variety of shows from comedy, weather reports, fundamentalist preaching, poetry readings, and more. But he heavily featured rural musicians, giving early airtime to roots and nascent country and Western music. It was just the 4th licensed radio station in the entire country, breaking new ground for what could be done with the medium. The main aim of the station, however, was to boost his own fortunes, which he did by means of a twice-daily radio show called Medical Question Box, where he would answer listener questions and discuss health issues, no matter how private. Conveniently for him, most health problems had a cure that only he could provide through one of his surgeries or his line of patent medicines he sold through a network of aligned pharmacies. Brinkley's questionable services were rumored to include several high-profile figures: Huey Long, Rudolph Valentino, and even Mr. League of Nations himself, Woodrow Wilson, all reputedly stopped by the Milford Hospital for a quick game of goat ball. William Jennings Bryan didn't want to hang us on a cross of gold, but he was purported to himself have hanging some nuts of goat. As Brinkley's fortunes grew, so did the target on his back. The editor of the journal The American Medical Association, Morris Fishbein, began a personal crusade against medical quackery, and the goat gland doctor was at the top of his list. In 1928, Fishbein exposed Brinkley's false medical education credentials by pointing out that Brinkley was actually working in New York during the time he was supposed to have been in medical school in Baltimore, and not either of the schools he actually attended. Fishbein took it a step further in 1930 by calling Brinkley a charlatan of the rankest sort, and Fishbein wasn't wrong. Dozens of Brinkley's patients had died of infections at his hospital, probably because sewing random animal gonads into people wasn't the most hygienic thing to do. Brinkley signed at least 42 death certificates at his hospital himself, and those are just the people who still sought his care after getting swindled. Still more crawled into other doctors in other towns severely ill. After an investigation into his practices and education, the Kansas Medical Board revoked his license, and in a further blow, his radio station lost its license as well to what the United States government considered obscenity: the doctor's frank discussion of sexual problems. For anybody else, that may have been the end. John R. Brinkley had other ideas. First, losing his medical license in Kansas didn't kill his medical practice. It was already staffed with other doctors who hadn't lost their licenses, and the controversy surrounding it all only made him a martyr in the public's eyes. His business grew even further. It was just fine. Second, losing the radio station in Kansas was a blow, but it led to Brinkley's biggest triumph. If they wouldn't let him have a radio station in the United States, by God, he was going to give him one anyway. Brinkley built a new radio station, XERA, in Villa Acuña, Mexico, literally across the Rio Grande from Del Rio, Texas. He built the studio in Del Rio wired to the transmitter in Mexico. When he restarted operations, the United States government pleaded with the Mexican government to shut him down. The Mexicans briefly relented, but then they remembered that the United States had recently apportioned all of the radio frequencies for North America and had conveniently forgotten to give Mexico any. Brinkley's station not only stayed in operation, but it grew in power over time. He hired a brilliant engineer who created an antenna 24 feet long and 8 feet wide, suspended between 300-foot-tall towers. Eventually, it broadcast with a power of 1,000,000 watts at a time when other stations could barely touch 1,000. It could be heard in 17 countries, dental fillings, and barbed wire fences. And it dominated the American South and West, overpowering the licensed stations all the way back to Kansas and well beyond. It was heard throughout the entire country, but during the Depression, it was pretty much the only radio station that could be picked up in rural American areas. It was here that Brinkley unknowingly left his most indelible mark. For his programming of folk and country and western stars found its largest audience yet, and its patron gave the world the genre's first stars. Most notable among them was the first family of country music, the Carters, who got their big break performing twice a day on Brinkley's Border Blaster. One of those folks tuning into those broadcasts? A 6-year-old boy in Arkansas named Johnny Cash. Other famous names like Gene Autry got their start in Brinkley's Del Rio studio. Country music got a signal boost literally and figuratively from a quack physician's pirate radio in Mexico. Morris Fishbein, meanwhile, hadn't given up on getting his man, and Brinkley had opened the door to the trap. Around 1933, the doctor switched the focus of his practice from erectile dysfunction to prostate issues, and he quietly stopped putting goat grapes into folks in favor of basically performing a vasectomy, followed by a series of injections of his own proprietary medicine called Formula 1020, which sold for $100 in 1930s money for 6 little injections. Fishbein capitalized on Brinkley's fatal error. See, nobody wanted to admit that their pickles still lacked tickle after his questionable surgeries. But failing to cure prostate issues, that's gonna piss off a lot of folks who can't get their piss on. With the assistance of disgruntled former patients, Fishbein was able to get a hold of some Formula 1020 for analysis. Yep, it was just water dyed blue. Brinkley was back up to his original scam. Fishbein set the trap with promising bait. A massive expose declaring Brinkley to be a fraud in every way that landed on newsstands across the country. Brinkley took the bait, suing Fishbein for libel, which was a monumentally stupid move. Now, Brinkley had to prove that Fishbein's claims were recklessly false, which, yeah. Not only that, Fishbein's attorney managed to get Brinkley to admit that he knew his goat gland operation was worthless and his claims otherwise were lies. The fallout was devastating. Legally branded a charlatan, the quack physician was now hit from every angle by malpractice lawsuits and financial woes. The radio station confiscated by the Mexican government. He and his wife put on trial for mail fraud in Arkansas, where they were living at the time due to the lax medical licensure laws. She pled no contest, but he died before he could stand trial. Financially and reputationally bankrupt, on top of, ethically and morally. Brinkley was a quack, a huckster, a fraud, a charlatan, and a con. But he saturated rural America with early country music, beginning an American love story that began with goat testicles and today finds its voice in acts like Florida Georgia Line and Jelly Roll, which seems oddly fitting. Even with all that, we still didn't even touch his failed runs for governor, the time he attacked a neighbor with an axe or shot at a patient, the time he tried to open a city zoo only to shoot the bear he'd acquired for its primary exhibit, the weird religious swag he tried to hawk on the radio like the Last Supper tablecloth and autographed pictures of Jesus, and his open devotion to a certain up-and-coming German leader. Yikes! I think that John Romulus Brinkley can best be described in only one word. That guy was nuts. This has been American Esoterica. All sounds are made by me, Brian Powers. Did I get it wrong? Did I get it right? Just want to tell me you listen to real country and not all that fake stuff? Drop me a note. The address is yellandamercanesoterica.com. More information on this show can be found at americanesoterica.com. Thank you for listening, and God bless America.